Hey, I wanted to let you know that I've launched a podcast called The Writer's Mind. This podcast is not about story theory. It's about philosophy, psychology, and worldview building so that you can become a more critical thinker and a stronger writer. Click the first link below to watch on YouTube or listen on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. A question I get asked all the time is, can you create a story with two protagonists? The short answer is, of course, yes, but there's a few different ways to do it, and you need to have a clear understanding of the type of dual protagonist story you are writing if you want the end result to work. So what does a dual protagonist story look like? And how can you incorporate this idea into your own story? Today, I will answer these questions and give you a practical look at writing dual protagonists. Let's begin. Let's quickly go back over what defines a protagonist. Laios Egri writes, "The pivotal character, or protagonist, is the one who creates the conflict and makes the play move forward. The protagonist is the character who drives the story. They are the reason there is a story at all. And the protagonist is usually the character that the audience is following the closest throughout the story. So how do you add two characters who are driving the story forward? There's a few different ways to add two protagonists into your story. Let's look at a couple ways of doing it. The first way to do it is called the CoProtagonists. CoProtagonists are when two characters are driving the story together. They have the same goal and push the story forward in unison. Mad Max Fury Road is a great example of co-protagonists. The protagonists of the story are Furiosa and Max. Furiosa and Max start off as enemies, but over the course of the story, they team up and begin working together. How does Mad Max Fury Road pull this off? We begin the story with Max. We watch him struggle against the war boys and get taken into captivity. However, after our initial meeting of Max, Furiosa is the character actually driving the story. Furiosa has been working on an escape plan for some time now, and it's Furiosa who creates the inciting incident for the story when she turns off course.
Boss, we're not going to Gastown?
We're heading east.
For the first 30 minutes of the film, Max is literally along for the ride. He stays strapped to the vehicle while the war boys pursue Furiosa. At the 30-minute mark, Max springs into action, and we have our first conflict between our two protagonists. Here, Max is the one changing the story. He forces himself onto Furiosa's rig. He forces her to adapt to a new situation, and it's here that they begin their shaky alliance.
Kill switches. I set the sequence myself. This rig goes nowhere without me.
You can get in.
A little later, we actually see them work together for the first time.
No. I'll go.
Over time, Max becomes more and more a part of this team. He and Furiosa's goals fully align, and they work together to save Immortan Joe's wives and get to the Green Place. The challenge with writing this kind of story is making sure that the two protagonists are actually different enough from one another where both are important to the story. The way to achieve this is by having both characters take different action as they move towards the same goal. They should have disagreements, they should have different ideas, and they should try to solve problems in different ways. If they become too similar, then one of them just becomes useless to the story and should be removed, therefore making the story a traditional single protagonist narrative once again. Give them the same goal, don't make them the same person. One film I'd also like to note is The Shawshank Redemption. It may seem like The Shawshank Redemption has co-protagonists in Andy and Red, but it does not. Red is not the driver of the story. While Red is the narrator and a character we stay with closely, he is not the one who takes the important action that changes the story. Andy is the one who does that. This film is simply an example of the audience watching from the perspective of a character that isn't the protagonist. The second way to do a dual protagonist story is called conflicting protagonists. Conflicting protagonists are when the audience follows and roots for two characters who drive the story, but those characters are one another's antagonist. So a conflicting protagonist story looks very similar to the traditional protagonist-antagonist story. The only difference being that the two characters are both driving the story forward at equal strength. The audience is closely following and empathizing with both characters. One of the clearest examples of this kind of story is found in The Prestige. The Prestige follows two magicians who start as friends but become bitter rivals as the story continues. The entire story is built on one simple principle. Each character directly sabotages the other, which moves the story forward. The entire story's conflict is built upon their rivalry.
Which knot did you tie, Warden? I don't know.
What also makes this story work is that we follow both characters and fully understand their point of view. And this is what really allows a story to work as a dual protagonist plot versus a more traditional protagonist-antagonist plot.
You had a new trick. It was the greatest magic trick I've ever seen.
When you write a story with conflicting protagonists, the biggest challenge is making sure you don't put too much of the spotlight on one character over the other. The way to make conflicting protagonists work is by empathizing and understanding both characters equally. If you don't, it turns back into a simple protagonist versus antagonist story. One thing you may have noticed as I laid out Dual Protagonists is that the lines get really blurry between what is two protagonists versus what is just a protagonist and a strong side character, as well as what is two conflicting protagonists versus what is just a regular protagonist versus antagonist story. Many new screenwriters find the idea of the dual protagonist concept a lot more interesting than it actually is. For new screenwriters, the main purpose of writing this kind of story is so they can tell friends at the coffee shop about their new screenplay. The reality is, these stories work like all the rest. Having two protagonists doesn't mean you are breaking some fundamental element of story or doing anything new. The fundamentals remain the same. Focus on telling a great story by building strong philosophical conflict and character change. Don't get lost in concepts that ultimately don't matter as much for your story. Hey, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe. And click the first link in the description to watch the podcast now.